Hello and welcome to the second session of our symposium, Science Communication to Boost Diversity in STEM. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Isla and I'll be your host for today. We're also joined by Natalie Pettorelli, who organised the event, and she'll be in charge of our Q&A today. So this session is titled Science Communication to Showcase Diversity in the Science Community. And we've got three great speakers, Professor Seirian Sumner, who'll be talking about Soapbox Science, Kerry Bailey from the Zoological Society of London, and Dr. Alfredo Carpineti from Pride in STEM. So after each talk, there'll be some time for questions. So please, if you have a question for the speakers, type them into the Q&A box and we'll pass them on for you. So if we start with Professor Seirian Sumner. Seirian is a professor of behavioural ecology at University College London. She studies social insects to understand their behaviour, ecology, evolution and role in ecosystems. She's especially interested in social wasps and is working hard to give wasps a PR makeover. As part of these efforts, she co-founded the Big Wasp Survey in 2017, a citizen science project to engage the public with social wasps in their backyard. She also promotes diversity among researchers and academia through Soapbox Science, which she co-founded with Natalie Pettorelli in 2011. Seirian, are you ready?
Thank you, Isla. That was a lovely introduction. Okay, I'm ready to share my screen. Okay, does that look good to you?
Looks good.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I'm going to be talking about Soapbox Science and how it gives a voice to women in science. So many moons ago, when this lovely lady here, Natalie Pettorelli, and I were much younger, we were both research fellows at the Zoological Society of London, and we'd also just been given some awards for women in science, and it's really brought home to us the issues of women in science. And so we had a crazy idea, as you do when you're young and carefree. We thought, wouldn't it be brilliant if we could take the matters of gender inequality into our own hands and bring and somehow promote the visibility of women in science. And we thought the best way to do this would be the cheapest, no frills, grassroots approach that we could possibly think of. And that was to put scientists, female scientists, on boxes on the streets to talk to anyone who might be passing by. And so that's what we did on a whim. It was a one-off event. So we planned in 2011. And we had a fabulous lineup of 12 speakers, one of whom was Georgina Mace, who sadly passed away earlier this year. And we are still here 10 years later. We're now in 2021, and Soapbox Science is still running. So this talk is about the history of Soapbox Science and the journey that Natalie and I have taken over the last 10 years. So the first question that you might have is, why women? It's all very well taking scientists out of their ivory towers and putting them on the streets, but to talk to the public, but why should that just be women? Well, there is a reason for this. And the reason is that there is a problem with the inequality in science with respect to gender. So here are just a few of the top things that spring to mind for me at the moment as to how imbalanced the gender representation is among the science, the academic environment. Only 24% of UK professors are actually women. The first female physics professor was only appointed in 1991. There are only 8.5% of Royal Society Fellows that are women, and that was of 2018. And more topically now, in this pandemic, which we are still living through, women are experiencing a much greater decline in their research time than men. So there is really a problem here that we need to start addressing. Now, one of the common explanations for gender inequality in science is that girls just aren't interested in science at all. Well, that's just not true. Girls actually love science at school. This figure shows how the representation of the different of males and females in across the academic careers, so through from GCSE levels at schools to A levels, undergrads and postgrads. And the light colour is the female proportion, and the dark colour is the male proportion. So you can see that at school, girls are equally as likely to take the sciences as boys are. And even at A level, at least for the biological sciences, they are female biased, although there is a drop off in the physical sciences, engineering, technology. But as you get to undergraduate level and postgraduate level, you gradually see the proportion of women declining, although still at postgraduate level, girls they show that they really are very interested in sciences at that level. But it's when you get to this academic level, into the primary research roles, the permanent jobs in academia, and you can see that in pretty much all the sciences, there's this steep decline, particularly after the first permanent position of being a researcher, such that at the professor level, there is a very small proportion of professors who are women. So this has been termed the leaky pipe. There's nothing wrong with getting girls interested in science, even at graduate level, but there's something that happens once they get to that point in their career where they have to be committing to a permanent position, or the opportunities that are standing in their way to give them those. And the pandemic is exacerbating this problem. So this was a study published just last year, where there was a survey of academics, and actually I took part in this myself. It was an online survey, and at the time the schools were closed around the world, and we were all juggling childcare and research time and teaching all at the same time. And this figure nicely shows how the research was impacted by people who, by the pandemics, that our research time has been massively impacted. But although teaching time has actually, we've compensated by increasing our teaching time. But the effects are much stronger on women than they are on men, and particularly women who have dependents, so particularly an under 5-year-old. And those of you who have homeschooled your children over the last year or so will empathise with this. And of course, that includes men as well as women. But because of the disparity in how households generally work, it is normally the woman it's often the woman who's taken the biggest hit on that. So the problem of gender equality in science, inequality in science, is not a thing of the past. It's actually becoming even more serious as we are in modern times. Okay, so why should we care about the lack of gender equality in science? Well, there are many reasons to want a gender balance, or any kind of diverse working groups. So because they are much more creative, and they produce higher quality science, and they're much more productive. And there's evidence for this from both academia and also in businesses. I mean, businesses are way ahead of us in academia for thinking about diversity in working groups. They already know, they've quantified that their returns in their productivity and their sales in businesses are much higher when they have a gender balanced group. But also there's a demand for STEM workers. Every year there's a 40,000 shortfall in people in the STEM sector in the UK. So we really do need to care about levelling the playing field, because otherwise we're losing that 50% of the population who have got a lot to offer to the STEM community. In 2014, the UK government actually put out a bill on gender equality. And they highlighted that there was a real problem here, in that there was a lack of availability of female role models. And they also noticed that of the learned societies and the higher education institutes, they should be emphasising these female role models more, and particularly those who've combined a STEM career with family life, just to show that you can do both. You can have this fulfilling science career, but you can also take a role in your family life. But they also highlighted that encouraging girls in science was really commendable, but the efforts are wasted if women are then disproportionately disadvantaged in their scientific careers compared to men later on. So they were highlighting the need to action for change. Now, one of the problems with women, the leaky pipe in science, is possibly that there is this stereotype of what a scientist is. And this is one of my favourite papers. It's from 1957. It was published in the prestigious journal Science. And what they did is they asked secondary school children to write essays about what a scientist is, who a scientist is, and what they do. And they had 35,000 essays. And I'm just going to draw out a couple of really top quotes that spring to mind here. It was a very qualitative analysis, but these are the things that that kept coming up in these essays by these children. They described a scientist as a man who wears a white coat, who's elderly, bald, and wears a beard. So immediately we've got the stereotype of a male scientist then. But equally, these children said that a scientist should not marry. No one wants to marry him, and he neglects his family, has no social life, and he bores his wife. So this is the opinions of these children in the 1950s about who a scientist would be, and the type of person, type of personality, and the life outside work that they would have. So you can immediately see that there was an enormous stereotype standing in their way. Now you might think, well, that was the 1950s. Things have moved on, things have changed. Well, not so much. Another study from the 1980s looked at children in the 1970s to the 1980s, that's my age group, and they asked children to draw, 5 to 11-year-olds, to draw a scientist, and less than 0.05% of these children actually drew the scientist as a female. So that's the generation that I grew up in, and there is still evidence today that this stereotype of who a scientist is very much male orientated. Now, this is having knock-on effects to the world that is academia now, the culture that we as academics live in. And implicit bias is rearing its ugly head, and it's really, there is a lot of evidence to show that we are all biased in academia, and this is men and women of every walk of life. We are implicitly biased because of this cultural background that we come from. So, for example, studies have shown that we are very biased in how we rank people in job applications. So CVs with a female name were ranked lower than identical CVs with that same CV but with a male name. Women need to be 2.5 times more productive than men in order to be awarded the same competence score in grant applications. And in terms of awards, which of course are those kind of icings on the cake for your CVs to get you your next job, men are 8 times more likely to receive a scholarly award than women. So these are all evidence of implicit bias. There's also implicit bias in the way that in our research outputs. So men publish more papers than women. Women publish fewer papers in the more sort of high profile, expensive areas of research. Women are more likely to be a middle author, so they're less likely to be the first or the last author, which are the most prestigious places to be. And also women are less likely to participate in collaborations that actually lead to publications. So that means that women will carry on and pursue research collaborations without necessarily having that goal of having that publication at the end. So the facts are that girls really love science. They love it at school, they love it at undergraduate level. But the reality is that women do leave science at a higher rate than men. There is this leaky pipe. And that women achieve less scientific prestige than men do. And that the key drivers for this leaky pipe are to do with the stereotypical image of scientists and also this implicit bias that we are culturally ingrained to have in academia. So what is the agenda of academics today? Well, there is a lot of implicit bias training going on in most universities and research institutes. We're working hard to try and combat that and raising awareness that we are all biased. We are trying to encourage good practice. For example, in the UK, we have the Athena Swan programme, which encourages departments to evaluate the degree to which they have a fair gender balance across the board. But we also need to work harder in challenging the stereotypes of who a scientist is and provide role models for the next generation of scientists such that they're not suffering from this same implicit bias that we do and the same barriers that we have encountered. And it's these two last parts of the agenda that Soapbox Science has been trying to address. So coming back to Natalie's and my original idea, it was to take these female scientists out of the labs, out of their ivory towers, and put them on the streets on a box to talk to the public about their science. So stripping away any kind of middle person from that dialogue with the public. And I have to confess, we didn't, this isn't our idea. In fact, this idea of standing on a box and talking about things that you're really passionate about dates back to the early Victorian times, and particularly at Hyde Park Corner in London, which became known as Speaker's Corner, and it was an arena for free speech. So people could go along there and speak to the people, speak to the masses, to the crowds, about things that they felt very passionate about. And that could be religion, it could be science, it could be politics. And so the Hyde Park Corner, Speaker's Corner, is thought to be a kind of the birth of democracy in the UK. And so we thought, well, what better way than to piggyback on that very successful model of sharing ideas and passion, than to adopt that model for our female scientists. So the next question is, well, why did you think about using outreach to tackle gender inequality? I mean, is this really the right way to go? Well, the reason why we thought that putting females on the street to talk to the public, to making them really visible, is because men do dominate the public voice. And if we want to try and break down these stereotypes of who a scientist is, we need to tackle the voice that is bringing, that is to the public. Male experts outnumber women by 3. And men are much more likely to take part in a public engagement event than women. And they're much more likely to be contacted by the media. You only have to switch on the radio to have evidence of that. But importantly, who the orator is delivering that science message is really important, because gender influences how the public perceive experts and that information. The science suggests that women are more trustworthy than men, and that women are less trusting of men and of experts, but that women value and trust information from other women and other communities. So if we're trying to tackle that prejudice in those younger generations about who a scientist is, then it's so important that we provide female role models to the public, to not only the next generation of scientists, but also the people that influence the decisions, the future career paths of those young people. So in other words, their families, their friends, their grannies, their grandpas, everyone who influences the decisions that those people make. So Soapbox Science is not just another science outreach event. It's not a festival as such. I mean, in the UK in particular, we are so blessed with many different types of science festivals around the country. In the summer months, pre-pandemic at least, you could barely move around the country without stumbling across some kind of science festival, and they're all absolutely fabulous events, but they require you to make that decision to go to that science festival and to meet that scientist and to take your kids along, and perhaps even have to buy a ticket to go and access that science. And what we wanted to do with Soapbox Science is to try and target the person who wouldn't have the opportunity to go to one of these science festivals, or wouldn't have the inclination or the means, the funds to go to those science festivals. And that's why we thought, hey, let's just bring the scientists to the people on the streets. So that was 10 years ago, and now, I mean, we have had a phenomenal number of women stand on our boxes. Over the years, Soapbox Science has grown. It started off as just this one event that Natalie and I ran on the South Bank in London, and then just organically, through the enjoyment of the speakers, really, it's expanded to have 42 events in 2019. And we are growing still today despite the pandemic. And the way that this has grown is really very much a grassroots approach, because it's the people who took part as the scientists on the boxes, or they saw it happening in London and they said, hang on a minute, I want this to happen in my city too. And it's grown organically with the support and the hard work of all these women and their local organising teams. Now we put out a call. At the beginning, we invited people to come and stand on our boxes. And we had to persuade them because it was kind of slightly out of their comfort zone. But these days, we actually put out a big call for speakers, and we are inundated with applications. And as of today, we've had over 1,600 people females stand on our boxes. They come from all walks of the scientific lives. Life sciences, engineering, chemistry, computer science, medicine. Each event tries to get a nice spread across the different disciplines. And it's really important that we give everyone, no matter what level of the career structure, career level, the opportunity to share their science with the public. So we get a mix of professors, PhD students, postdocs, lecturers, fellows, and even from outside academia to really showcase the diversity of women in science. Due to the fabulous enthusiasm of our speakers, it has exploded around the world. And this is something that Natalie and I could never have imagined would happen when we set up that first event in 2011. There are now, Soapbox Science is now in 14 countries around the world, 59 cities, and we've had 141 events. And so this is something that we are swept away with. And it's very much that Soapbox Science is now a global initiative, and it can only happen with the hard work and commitment and enthusiasm of these people from all around the world. We've been very honoured to have awards given to Soapbox Science. So in 2016, we had the ZSL Silver Medal for contributions to zoology and education, and also the Points of Light award from the UK Prime Minister. And the British Ecological Society, their first Equality and Diversity Award was given to Soapbox Science. And in 2020, we were identified in the top 50 of the most innovative of outreach events across the EU and the USA. But as I said, Soapbox Science and its success is down to the massive enthusiasm, drive, and commitment of local organising teams. So starting off with just me and Natalie on the South Bank in London, we first helped train small groups of organisers, firstly in local cities in the UK, but now across the world. And we do this now remotely with the help of our amazing coordinator, Isla Watton, who's put together a load of fabulous videos that explain to local organising teams how to put their events together. And here is just a splattering of some of the fabulous local organising teams that exist around the world. As well as the local organising team who actually puts the whole event together, these Soapbox events cannot happen without the numbers of volunteers who come along on the day and support the speakers, rally around to bring in the public. They are full of enthusiasm, and often it's the volunteers who then the next year they've got the courage to apply to actually be a Soapbox scientist themselves. So there's a real sort of legacy of this Soapbox community that is really heartwarming. But of course, Soapbox Science isn't only about the speakers, it's also about the audiences. And our initial plan was that Soapbox Science would reach those people who hadn't intended to come and learn about science that day, the accidental audience. And from our surveys of footfall and questionnaires of the people who attend the events around the world, we are really hitting that, in that 50% of the people who come to a Soapbox or are at a Soapbox Science event are there accidentally. So we really feel that Soapbox is really hitting the mark there. And we've had over almost 250,000 visitors to our events around the world. Soapbox, as you can imagine, it's a bit of a spectacle. You see these female scientists standing on a box in the middle of a busy street. It attracts the interest of the media. And this is actually a slightly dated collection of the media from the very early days of Soapbox Science, because we've not been able to keep pace with the phenomenal amount of media interest that our Soapbox scientists and their events get across the world. But just to put some figures on the map, our audience reach is over 20 million. We've had over 60 news articles and 31 publications. So Soapbox is not just on the streets, it's in the media, it's getting to people who even can't get to an event themselves. Now, we don't just get our soapbox scientists to stand on a box unprepared. We put a lot of effort into helping train them. And in the early days, we did this in person at ZSL. We'd invite our people along, our speakers along, to run workshops so they could meet the other speakers. It would be a networking event. They get to practice their soapbox science events. And we even were able to get some fabulous science communicators to come along and speak to our speakers about how best to engage the public. And these days we have, because of the global reach of the Soapbox Science events, we now have these training facilities online such that local organising committees can actually run their own training events for their local speakers. Now, the impact on the public is one thing, but one of the things that we first wanted to do with Soapbox Science was to promote the visibility of those speakers themselves and to give them a boost, to give them that extra push in their scientific career. And the two things that we focused on, seeing if our scientists were actually having impact on their careers, is their confidence and their performance in STEM activities. And women in STEM are known to lack confidence. It's thought that the lack of confidence is a major issue in their career progression. So we set out to survey our speakers, because we got them going back several years now, to see whether they thought that Soapbox Science had any impact on their confidence. And we found that there was evidence that there was a significant boost to their confidence for their speakers. So before Soapbox Science, the speakers rated themselves as 43% of them rated their confidence as being very low. And after they'd taken part in Soapbox, they were more likely to rate their confidence as high. So those that rated their confidence as high before Soapbox was 53%, and after Soapbox, it was 84%. And we were able to break this down into their confidence in public speaking, their confidence in their work life, but also their confidence in networking. And these three things are really important. They're key points in how a woman's or any scientist's career progresses. We also found that that our speakers found that the female-only platform was a significant boost to their confidence, especially to the least confident women. 30% of them said that it had a very high influence on their confidence. The fact that they were just there with women and they weren't trying to compete with a man with a big booming voice on the streets. It was also the least confident speakers who gave more public talks after Soapbox. So just putting yourself forward for Soapbox, often you'd think, well, it's only the people who've done public talks before that would do that. And that's not the case. We don't select speakers on the basis of their previous track record as public speakers. In fact, it's really the ones that haven't really spoken much before in public that we want to give them the toolbox and the confidence to go out there and do more of it. And 44% said that Soapbox had a high impact on them volunteering to give public talks in the future. We also found that our speakers really valued their participation in Soapbox when they were going for promotion. So in the time span of our survey, 54% of them had applied for promotion since taking part in Soapbox, and almost all of them used Soapbox in their application. And at least half of them said that they think it had a moderate to strong impact on their outcome, just from the comments they got back from their promotional committees. So in 2018, Mary Beard said that public speech was in the past and is still now, if not the defining attribute of maleness, and that the public arena of speech was dominated by a male voice. We like to think that maybe Soapbox is giving women in STEM that voice. They're giving that platform to females to get their voice out there, to get them known, and to change and challenge those perceptions of who a scientist is. So males are perceived as being the public voice. They are also perceived, because they are the public voice, because that's what people hear. They hear men talking about clever things, being the experts on the radio. Men are seen as those authority figures. And as a result, men are seen as being leaders and being more able. And what we think is that Soapbox is having some kind of role in breaking the links between this male dominance of the public voice and their authority, their perception of them being authority and leaders and being more able. And the way that it does that is that Soapbox is boosting confidence for those female speakers, but also raising awareness amongst the audience members and the public. So by giving women a public voice and giving them female-only platforms, we think that Soapbox is having a role in breaking these links and making it more achievable for women to have a brighter future in science. Now, obviously, the pandemic has had a bit of a hit on the format of Soapbox Science, because it's all about getting up close with the public gather around your soapbox, you're talking to them, there's lots of interaction, and obviously that hasn't been possible in the last year or so. But that didn't stop us. In fact, the silver lining of the pandemic is that it has forced Soapbox to go online. And our speakers were incredible last year in that they adapted incredibly quickly to putting their Soapbox talks, recording them themselves, and they're now on YouTube. And then we had a more interactive audience on the chats over YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, where the scientists, where the public could type their chats in and get that one-to-one chat with the public, with the scientists, even though they weren't able to get there in person. And in fact, this has been so successful because it's actually widened our reach, because now anyone can watch a scientist and engage with that scientist, that female scientist, in any part of the world. So we've had, school children in Canada are able to talk to scientists in Tanzania. So it's really opened the reach of the Soapbox Science community. And so where we're looking forward now is that we're very much more of a hybrid format with Soapbox. That nothing beats having the scientists on the street talking to people in person. But the online format has increased the participation, widened the participation, both geographically and economically, to people who may not live in those cities where those events are going on. And none of this could have happened without the fabulous Isla. I mean, Isla is really Soapbox. She runs everything now. She is responsible for providing or making all of the online stuff work, all of the training videos, all of the coordination. She is the reason that Soapbox continues to be the success that it is. So I'm going to just finish now with an excerpt from one of our early Soapbox Science events, which remains for me one of our favourite videos. There are many more videos on our Soapbox Science YouTube that you can also access. But if I could just have just a couple of minutes of your time to watch this film, and then I just thank you beforehand for listening.
I am incredibly nervous. I had hardly any sleep last night. It's not the sort of thing that I normally do at all. I've heard people have got trampolines and people are going to have people dancing, and you sort of think, ooh, what am I going to do to get my people going to me? So, penguin. We'll have to think of a name for the penguin, won't we? I don't want to call him Percy, it's too obvious.
Yes, the trampoline. So I spent quite a while trying to find ways of explaining the elastic interaction. That's what I'm going to be demonstrating with the trampoline. I've been a bit nervous, I have to admit. Can you find out about hydrogen? So from a physics perspective, what I look at is the way hydrogen causes problems inside metals, ships, reactors, oil rigs, materials that are used in huge, giant structures. Have a guess, what the coldest temperature of a recorded is? It was recorded in my book. I see actually essentially exactly the same material here. Okay, so how does the animal do that? And can we use that chemistry? Can we copy that in the lab to make some films?
Yeah, I'm going to work out how many bacteria are in yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I think they had to drag me off, so it was not nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be. If you went back 200 years ago, then the temperatures in the UK were much cooler. So most insects can't move very well if it gets too hot. If you watch a movie, you see, James Bond standing there while a spider crawls up his arm. Everyone cringes in the cinema, so these parts in your brain are acting in a similar way as if you were a human. They were interested, and they were asking questions, and they were engaged, and I couldn't have expected anything like it, and it was so exciting. It's such a great and different way to communicate about our work to the public, and it's awesome. It's truly awesome.
Thank you, Seirian.
Thank you.
That was great, thanks. So if we're all right to move on to questions now, just a reminder, if you've got a question for Seirian, please type it in the Q&A box so we can get that to her. So I'll pass over to Natalie.
Yes, so Seirian, we have 3 questions for you for the moment. So the first one is about the government and whether they took any concrete action to address women in STEM in the workplace.
Concrete action, no, I don't think so. I mean, I think the fact that I think every workplace now has got much stricter guidance, or actually legislation, on how we can ensure that recruitment, for example, is done fairly and there's no discrimination. But that applies not just to gender, but also to other protected characteristics as well. So I think the government is trying to put in place legislation, but it's quite, in terms of tackling a lot of the problems are cultural in academia, and I think it takes time to change those things, and the government can't change culture. I think that one of the things about Soapbox Science is that we felt that was one way in which we could change the culture. But we don't have the power to change legislation, but we can certainly change culture. So it's about, but this sort of thing takes time.
So someone came back saying, are there any concrete action you would like the government to take?
I don't know. I don't know about that one. I think it would be good if we could, I mean, I think at the moment it's still very vague as to how exactly, so I guess positive action is definitely something that should be encouraged a little bit more. Positive discrimination, of course, is not legal, but I think one of the things that we do in Soapbox is that we are we're trying to bypass. It is positive action for bringing women and giving women that platform. It's hard to know how to do that. I mean, there are lots of things that the programs like Athena Swan are trying to do in academia, which is to highlight the fact that some university departments are having an unequal workload. Such, women tend to take up more of the teaching, more of the pastoral care of students, and that has a knock-on effect to their careers. It's not something that the government can deal with at the moment, though.
And then there's a question about trust, and someone was asking whether there's any evidence that men trust women experts more than men, or is it that women trust other women more?
I think it's more that women trust other women more. I think that there are studies that show that, well, as I said, the whole thing about the male voice comes across as very much an authority. That authority is considered much more strongly by men than by women.
And then my last question, so sorry for the others, is because we have to keep on track with the time, but someone is asking whether there's anything more that people can do in school to encourage girls and women to pursue careers in STEM.
I think the schools could be more proactive in helping girls find placements and having that work experience, because I think the way that the internships work in schools is that it's very much down to the child to decide or to be proactive and find some kind of placement. And I think even though there's much more of an emphasis now on encouraging girls into science topics at school, That's not the barrier, as I said before. It's more making them understand that there are what kind of careers they could have, and having that the role model. So helping pair them up with suitable work experience placements, I think, would be really good.
That's it for me, Ayla. You're on mute.
Thanks, Natalie. So we're going to move on to Kerry. So Kerry is the Community and Learning Manager at ZSL London Zoo, with over 25 years of conservation, education and community engagement experience. She's passionate about providing lifelong learning opportunities around zoology and conservation science through preschool to professor pathway that empowers more people to work for wildlife. So Kerry, if you'd like to take it away.
Thank you so much, Ayla, and hopefully in the slides I'm about to show, it might respond to Seirian's answer there about providing more young girls with opportunities for placements in science sector. So fingers crossed. I'll share my screen. Is that okay?
Yes.
Fabulous. And you can hear me okay, Ayla?
Yep, all great.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so thank you for inviting me here today. You will probably be able to tell just from looking at my long subtitle that I do have a tendency to talk. So I want to reassure you that I have made sure this fits within the allocated time slot I was given. In preparing and, to be honest, procrastinating for this presentation, I experienced a range of emotions. Firstly, it was just pride at Natalie asking me to be present, and excitement to have the chance to show off our plans and what we hope to achieve as a team. Also, there was some concern about making sure I had enough time to prepare enough to do a good job, as well as a little concern that I don't fall into my old procrastinating habit. And there was also this strange, constant, sort of dull, nagging sense, mostly in the pit of my stomach, that maybe I'm not the right person to be included in the talks today and not the one you want here. I'll be honest now, I don't have lots of data because I don't use lots of academic language. I don't have the evidence-based research just yet to prove the impact of the work that I want to share with you. But then, allowing my procrastination to do its creative, unconscious thing, I did have the realization that maybe I am the right person to be here to explain the approach we're taking to diversify our audience and ensure that everyone feels equal, and that we also provide equitable opportunities for all those we engage with. So, as I said, there are no stats or graphs in the slides I've prepared. It's mostly just some nice background images of people and a few other animals. And I will share just a simple approach that we're taking to remove barriers, to create opportunities, and to embed ZSL through London Zoo into our local community. I also hope to inspire some of you watching and listening to spot the opportunities for you to share your work with the children and young people and the other audiences we engage with, plus identify where your scientific experience and expertise can be utilised to demonstrate the impact of this work. So please do contact me if you see opportunities after the information I share. So traditionally, I would just introduce myself as Ayla did, with a nice biography highlighting the key points of what to me feels like a surprisingly long career. So for example, my name is Kerry. I have 25 years experience in conservation and the environment sector. I do have a degree in biology and psychology. I joined ZSL, Zoological Society of London, in 2017, and my current role is as the Community and Learning Manager for London Zoo. However, I have indulged a little because I want to share a more medium-length version of my background with you, just because aspects of it felt relevant for reasons I hope become clear. So I was born in Portsmouth. We're a close family. We would have ticked the low-income box with occasional periods of free school meals. I lived in a lovely council masonette on a really friendly estate until my parents were able to buy their first property through a government scheme. So if you imagine something out of Coronation Street, that was sort of the style house that we had. Had a very happy childhood. We avoided the beach that we lived incredibly close to because there was too many people there. So that meant that we were always out in the countryside and connecting and having experiences, mostly getting lost in the nearby countryside. I loved animals, including the 6 cats we shared our home with. My mum's still is a sucker for a rescue cat. And I became vegetarian at 10 years old, and my parents converting at different times a few years after, which surprised most people, especially those who meet my dad. Passionate about animal welfare and animal rights. I got a few marches under my belt in my teens, and I was first from our family, so over 30 cousins. I was the second youngest, and I was the first to attend university. As I mentioned, I studied biology and psychology, which included a module on animal behaviour and a research project at our local zoo, Marwell, down in Hampshire. The only problem was I really disliked zoos. So I asked, quite out of character for me, not to have to do this element of the course, but was firmly informed I had to. The introduction session, delivered by Anita, an education officer at the zoo and still a good friend today, immediately dispelled some of the beliefs I had, e.g. all the animals are taken from the wild, and gave me a clear understanding of the role of zoos in conservation. It also helped because I got the bonus of finding out this dream job existed and my career choice had been made for me there. I volunteered in my last year of university. As luck would have it for me, a member of the team left in the summer term I graduated. So there were 28,000 children to teach. So they were pretty desperate, and I was offered the role after being interviewed by the county's science inspector and the director and founder of Marwell. I left the zoo in 2000 to travel and fulfilled a range of roles to broaden my experience and understand the challenges facing nature and endeavouring to be part of various solutions. So some highlights of my career have been implementing the first alternate weekly bin collection, coordinating biodiversity action plans, and providing 6,000 days a year of volunteering opportunities for adults with learning disabilities. I then became established in our local council countryside service down in Hampshire County Council, where I remained for 13 years in a number of roles. I got promoted outside of my passion, which I think is a very Western phenomenon, and then had an epiphany in Corcovado National Park, where the photo's taken, in Costa Rica, that I wanted to return to conservation education, and the ZSL role was shared with me a couple of weeks later, and here I am. Now, I know you all signed up for a presentation on becoming London Zoo and not becoming Kerry, so thanks for indulging me in that. I'll now begin to share the work I do here at ZSL. Zoological Society in London is a conservation charity protecting wildlife, and our vision is a world where wildlife thrives. Our purpose is to inspire, inform and empower people to stop wild animals going extinct. And we have 3 key priorities to focus our efforts for the future. These are all based on our scientific research into the biggest conservation challenges facing wildlife, and are areas where all aspects of our work can contribute to achieving results. The wildlife and people element is about connecting people to nature, as you'd imagine, and a key area where we do this is at our zoos. The role of zoos for us means bringing nature within reach to millions of people, connecting people to wildlife, inspiring young and old through up-close and real-life experiences, educating and informing people on the challenges faced by wildlife and how our actions can impact on their survival, and empowering, hopefully, an army of engaged supporters to take positive action. And at London Zoo, we have 6 guiding principles that underpin everything we do, as you can see on the screen. This cascade of objectives from ZSL Vision through the core conservation challenges and London Zoo's 6 guiding principles leads on to the role of my department and what we aim to achieve through our work and how we engage with our audiences. We're not just London Zoo, we are London's zoo. And as such, our local community is incredibly important to us, and our role as a neighbour is key. As London Zoo, we are a brand known around the world. We're in a privileged position to be able to connect those who often are traditionally hard to reach with nature, and it's a powerful tool to influence and create change through empowering those people that visit. But we must also influence and support within our immediate community through high quality learning and education, through employment opportunities for those who perhaps wouldn't traditionally have the chance, or simply by being accessible and appropriate to our neighbours seeking benefits of reconnecting with nature. I just want to share this photo, and I will for a couple of the others. This is a family who contacted us. They live very locally, and this is the day before the zoo opened after the final lockdown. And we opened the zoo just for them a day early because they had been shielding for almost 2 years because one of the little girls is so poorly. So I just wanted to share that story with you. At this point, before I give you the exact details of our community and learning programs, I just want to mention another significant recent area of focus for us that obviously links in well with the theme today. So I hope through the objectives I've shared, you'll have seen that ZSL and London Zoo are already committed and have been to increasing diversity throughout our work. But in the past year, we recognise we can and should do even more to tackle the lack of diversity in our sector and in the representation of the people who work at ZSL and also the people we engage with. So from the top within our leadership team, we've created 6 diversity and inclusion action plans, which we aim to deliver in an ambitious timescale of 1 to 3 years to deliver those initial action plans. And we will do this continually through partnership working and consulting with audiences to ensure that we're user-led in how we tackle these challenges. I think it's key to realise that often we might try and put out solutions without ever really fully ensuring that we're trying to solve the correct problems. So by working with the audiences that we want to engage with more to identify the problems, we can ensure that we're actually then tackling those problems with the correct solutions. So we've mentioned some of the barriers and the role of our department to identify those barriers, and then the aim to be to remove them working with the audiences. Just a few here that have come through various research and evaluation, but also through working with our partners. I guess the initial one, cost, is quite obvious if you're thinking of a barrier to visiting London Zoo. We do have a fee to enter the zoo, and this can be very prohibitive. So we recognise that and are trying to address it. Obviously, your background may also influence whether or not you would engage with us at London Zoo or the wider organisation. So it may just be something that isn't part of your heritage, or even with young people that we engage with and their upbringing, they just don't go any further than their very local community. So although it's in London, it may just not be quite close enough for them to come and visit. I mentioned my own perception of zoos, and of course this is a barrier, especially for many young people as they're forming their opinions, and those who are animal lovers or particularly passionate about conservation may not fully understand the role of zoos. And also the fact that people may just think it's not for me, it's a visitor attraction, it's for tourists, and not somewhere that they would feel welcome. Site accessibility is an obvious issue that we have. The organisation and the zoo is almost 200 years old, so there are bound to be areas, including our 16 listed features and buildings, that do cause problems for people with mobility issues, but we're doing our utmost to address these, but just make sure that people are aware of it before they come and visit us. And finally, communication, how we present ourselves, whether that's on social media, through the language we use, through the images we use. So we're trying very hard to improve our communication to make that more accessible, to remove the barrier of how people perceive us and how we engage with them. The photo here is with some young people who we work with from Leonard, Cheshire, who are visually impaired. And the lady in the blue there is Freddie, who works in our digital team. And she's actually creating and improving our standards for how we communicate with people who are visually impaired on our social media and web pages through the feedback she's getting for those particular young people. So our community and learning department, we deliver 3 core programs of activities. A learning program, a careers and youth program, and a community engagement program. And across each of these, we have the same consistent approach. Firstly, is to deliver a very simple key message to our core audiences around ZSL's role. We're a conservation charity protecting wildlife, and we do this at our zoos and out in the wild, and we can't do it without you. So that's the key message that we're aiming to get across to these young people. We're here to inspire those we engage with to care, and our function is to provide the voice of the underserved audiences and take an outward-facing view from the zoo to learn from our community what the barriers are and how to remove them. So we do this through working with local audiences to ensure we're embedded in the community. We work with those underrepresented audiences to ensure we are inclusive and accessible to our community. And we work with education providers and partners to support young people to engage with the zoo. As I said, our key message and part of our approach is consistent to all of those that we engage with. And I think consistency is incredibly important. We focus on attitudes, so helping young people know why they need to help. We inspire pro-environmental attitudes and values. And we do this by telling inspiring stories about our brilliant planet, the animals that live on it, and the people who work to protect it. We also do this by helping them to access nature at the zoo, or even just in their local space and at their school grounds. And we reflect on how this benefits their health and well-being. Showcasing inspiring careers or opportunities also will help influence those attitudes and encourage people to want to help initially. Then we focus on influencing behaviours and ensuring people know how to help. We inform them about environmental issues and solutions through highlighting specific human-caused environmental problems, explaining actions or behaviours they can do to specifically help, ensuring that there's that reputation in all of the examples we use of diversity and culture, access and age. And we showcase examples of how other people are helping protect wildlife, so the work that many of you are doing. And finally, we influence confidence so that people feel able to help. We empower people to take action by demonstrating and encouraging the use of skills that enable them to engage with the natural world, championing accessibility and diversity, helping understand and overcome barriers that might be inhibiting their engagement, and providing as much support and encouragement to all those we engage with. So the first programme of activities that we have is probably something most of you are aware of and hopefully have benefited from in some format, which is our formal learning programme, which is offered to schools and often looks like a school trip. So we provide lifelong opportunities around zoology and conservation science through our preschool to professor pathway with this programme of activities. We offer hands-on engaging workshops linked to the national curriculum and STEM subjects. Now, it's worth mentioning here that pre-COVID, traditionally this would look like 100,000 students or more visiting London Zoo every year, and we would deliver workshops to almost half of those, about 46,000 in 2019. Now, post-COVID, we've taken the opportunity to really look at how we can make those changes to achieve the new priorities and the new goals that we've set ourselves. So when we're scaling back up, we want to ensure that we build in the changes to ensure we meet our goals and have a greater impact now through a depth of engagement, rather than scaling back up to something that is measured more by total numbers being the measure of success. So we do still offer one-off encounters with a group, and any group who participates in this offer will either have a one-off educational trip with a workshop or engage in our digital outreach activities from a select programme. But we also focus on specific schools much, much more, and we offer regular engagements with teachers, students and their families in our local schools. And finally, our level 3 area of engagement is to focus on specific individuals. So offering regular engagement with individuals who wish to pursue a career working animals and in conservation. So our zoo education access scheme is really that level 2 that I described there. Our education scheme will enable regular engagement with teachers, children and their families from our local schools for a good value annual fee. So we're looking at about £500 to offer any of our local schools from those areas initially to be able to come and visit us at the zoo as often as they like. The scheme offers exclusive opportunities, including a teachers hub, so they'll be able to come and use the space as teachers, to work together with other colleagues from their own school, but we feel really importantly from other colleagues in neighbouring schools, something that isn't happening at the moment. We provide a youth forum for those local students, family holiday clubs, and we aim for over half of our education group visits to be made by local schools and colleges from now on. So why do we want to have this sort of membership scheme for our schools? Well, if our goal is to inspire those we engage with to care and take action to protect wildlife and help equip them to do it, the theory is more engagement equals a bigger impact. Also, if our goal is to be London Zoo and embedded in our local community, then again, the theory is more engagement with these local schools equals a stronger relationship with our local community and how we're perceived. The scheme also enables the schools to take a whole school approach in their planning, the zoo to be part of their school community and know that we want to engage more with them. Our space is to be an extension of their classroom. Other benefits of the scheme we hope to see are for the pupils just more access to learning outside the classroom and to have real life applications of what they're learning, to create opportunities for them to understand careers in conservation and STEM subjects, and then once they have that understanding, to develop career pathways and experience for those who want to pursue those careers in conservation and STEM. We want to ensure that the pupils have teachers who feel more confident in taking their students out of the classroom, and that there are more opportunities for those students to go outside. And finally, just really to ensure that those kids have health and wellbeing benefits that we know accessing nature can provide. For the teachers, the benefits are they have this concierge service from our department and access to our team to help incorporate London Zoo into their learning topics across the curriculum. To ensure that they make the most of the Zoo Hub to share best practice and learn from other teachers, as well as all of our ZSL staff, including people here today. To provide them increased knowledge on conservation topics and case studies to be able to use in the classroom, give them confidence in taking those students out of the classroom. And again, with unlimited access to the zoo, hopefully that will mean they make the most of that and provide more opportunities to take those students outside. For our families, we hope the benefits will include the sort of traditional thing you'd expect of holiday clubs or after school clubs, family events. But really the exciting thing is we're able to offer them exclusive access to our new exhibits or our new visitor activities during the holidays, and to be able to get feedback and help them improve. We also want to feature them in our marketing more. So again, they can become more representative and more embedded in the work that we do. Also within our formal learning programme, but sitting slightly to the side, is our Young People and Careers programme. So if I say traditionally, and definitely pre-COVID, we would have achieved our vocational goals by offering zoo academies and various conferences, which were high quality and impactful, but had a set fee. And that obviously was able to exclude a lot of people who are unable to afford it. Since COVID, we've actually taken those programs and no longer have a fee with them. So you no longer have to pay for those, but we've taken those activities and have developed a careers program that's primarily available to those pupils from our local access schools. So it's already included with the scheme or for a subsidised cost to the school, so shouldn't exclude any of those young people. We want to make sure that we're creating supportive opportunities for London's young people to work at the zoo. And the photo up the top is of our first work experience students at London Zoo for over 10 years, I believe. These two young people were with us at the beginning of June. They're from a local school, they're year 10 students, so 14 to 15-year-olds, and they spent 2 weeks with us across 5 different teams at London Zoo and the diversity that we can offer in different roles at the zoo. So yeah, we're really pleased that we're able to actually now, on a rolling programme, I have at least two students, but we'll build that up to much more and we'll spread that out across the organisation. We're also collaborating with local colleges, and from September we hope to deliver accredited courses for 14 to 18-year-olds to promote careers in conservation and offer career pathways. So qualifications that they can actually obtain by almost being full-time at the zoo with us, or at least delivering some of the practical elements of their course at the zoo. And a focus for us in 2021 is to work with pupil referral units. So to adapt that Zoo Academy activity that we know is had such a great impact on the young people who used to participate, but turn that into an accredited course for some of those hardest to reach young people to benefit from. Some of you may have heard of the Kickstart scheme, which is a government scheme providing funding to create new job placements for 16 to 24-year-olds who are on universal credit and possibly at risk of long-term unemployment. So we've been really pleased to be able to offer 22 placements across several teams with a huge variety of roles because of the diversity of ZSL. So we've got young people working with us now in the grounds operatives team, on the animal support team working within our department, and also a wildlife epidemiology technical assistant is due to start soon. This is a significant programme for ZSL and aims to provide greater accessibility to our roles and gain fresh, innovative perspectives from a group of diverse and talented young people. We'll provide a positive and understanding work environment for these young people too, and we've got a mentoring and career development programme for them throughout the 6 months that they'll be working with us. And we'll use this opportunity to learn from them to develop our own London Zoo Youth Forum. I want to just mention here the importance of mentoring. I think that's one of the biggest things we're able to offer to our local young people, to really make them feel welcome and included, by giving them that experience of people who are already doing the job and telling them our own stories. So our aspiration for many of these young people through the Kickstart programme and work experience is that actually they will soon be the ones who apply for apprenticeships with us. And you can have a huge diversity of apprenticeship schemes. And also at London Zoo, we were the leading creator of the zookeeper role. So again, we'd like to think that soon many of our staff will be much more reflected of our local young people. We have our community engagement programme, and the reason that I flagged up the Snowdon Aviary project here first is because this lottery funded project had 2 main goals. The first was to restore our Grade 2 listed aviary, and it will become a new home for the colobus monkey troupe that we currently have at London Zoo. But for me, and really the reason that I joined ZSL, is because I could see that this project was a catalyst for embedding community engagement at the heart of London Zoo. And this was something for me, having been out of the zoo world for almost 20 years, I always felt was missing and was the key to really changing and improving the impact that zoos around the globe could have through engaging more with their local community. So the project itself was able to fund research into who our underrepresented audiences currently are. So we're able to target those audiences, working in partnership again, and also ensuring that we making sure we knew what the correct barriers are that we needed to tackle first. We created an activity plan which underpins some of the community engagement I'm about to share with you. But also, more importantly, the funding allowed us to have 2 permanent community engagement officers, and we're currently in the process of developing our dedicated community centre space, again, to make sure that we're much more accessible to our local community. So one of the first areas of our community engagement that we were able to launch was a community access scheme, partly in direct response to the cost being the barrier to so many people in our local community. So the scheme itself is eligible to organisations and community groups who work with local families on low income, people with disabilities and older people. We're also extending this to support people who have mental health conditions, so they're able to access nature. And currently we provide these tickets for those living in Camden and Westminster, but over the next few months and within the next 18 months, we'll have increased this so that anyone from London boroughs working with those organisations can access tickets from as little as £3. As you'll keep hearing, we work directly with organisations who represent those audiences we want to work with. So everything is underpinned by partnership working. For example, we work with Family Holiday Association, who target local families for days out, and we provide them with 5,000 tickets every year to distribute to families that have been referred to them. We also work with local community groups, and here are some visitors from one of our local residential homes, and some elderly people who hadn't been to the zoo for many, many decades. And again, I know this is about working with young people and providing opportunities for young people to engage in STEM and to make that more accessible. But you really have to go through entire generations for that to be something that then those young people feel more comfortable with when they're hearing their grandparents talk about the work that we do. I wanted to share quickly our volunteering programme with you. Last year, in order to open with COVID sort of mitigation and to make sure that we were incredibly safe, we had to call on local Londoners, and we actually campaigned to Londoners alongside a fundraising campaign. I put together a campaign that actually asked people to give their time, which is as important as anyone who's in a position to have donated money to us. And we created engagement stewards who are much more representative of our local community, because they were able to come to us. They were able to travel to us through walking. And we're going to call on those Londoners again to create a team of London Zoo champions who will represent our community through a new outreach programme that we're delivering again starting this year. We want those community outreach volunteers to be more representative of our community, but also a wider age range, calling on lots of younger volunteers, and also to go out into those residential homes. So we're looking at intergenerational work there as well. From June, we created a supported volunteer scheme, which ensures that having a learning difficulty or disability doesn't prevent anyone from volunteering and helping us in our work. So we're working with local organisations who provide services to adults with learning difficulties and disabilities, and they're coming in on a regular basis in groups to help us deliver our work. And we'll work with the youth offending teams too that are local to us, to offer young people reparation, giving them the chance to be connected to nature and learn about conservation, while undertaking a range of tasks that support the work that we do. And finally, for our community engagement programme, we have a new year-round programme of accessible activities and events at London Zoo, demonstrating our ongoing commitment to improving accessibility for those with particular disabilities. So our Purple programme includes audio described tours, British Sign Language interpreted days, and early openings. And that purple pound element is influenced the name. So that's Visit England give to the accessible tourism market is called the Purple Pound, in case any of you are wondering. So my final slide is just really to highlight the key areas to our approach to becoming London Zoo. We need that leadership support, and we need our culture within our organisation to really have diversity embedded at the heart of what we do, at everything we do and how we do it. It's not just a tick box exercise for us at ZSL. As you know, we're prioritising our local community, and I hope I've made that very clear today, that that really is a main priority to us at London Zoo and ZSL. That equitable approach, we can make things equal, but actually that taking a more equitable approach is going to be key to underpinning everyone having a fair chance. Providing the opportunities in the first place, so making sure if our role in our department is to facilitate that the opportunities are coming through to us for us to match up with the correct audiences, to co-create our programme with the right people and the audiences that we want to engage with, and to make the most of the COVID-19 effect. We have a blank sheet of paper almost to be able to build our programmes back up. We all learnt a lot in the last year, the importance of nature, some of our own values have changed. So we really, really want to make the most of that to ensure that we continue to work towards our vision where wildlife thrives, but hopefully all life can thrive much more positively. Thank you.
Thanks, Kerry, that was great. If I now pass over to Natalie, who has some questions for you.
Yes, and I'm not sure we'll all cover them all, but the first one is about the supported volunteering scheme. The question was, do you do any work with special school or targeted activities for young people with disability?
Yes, is a very short answer. As I said, I have a tendency to talk, but yes, we do. We, again, within our education access schemes, we've piloted that scheme, and I think at least 5 of our local SEN schools were part of that. We're also part of SEN in STEM. So again, we're part of a wider network, but we absolutely do work with special educational needs schools.
And another question about the demographic for the school around the zoo. So what are the demographics for those schools, and are there any low-income schools?
Yes, so I'm aware, especially in certain areas of where we live, there are some quite extremes of affluence versus deprivation. So one of our core partners with any of the boroughs is the local council, and obviously giving my background of lots of council experience, I know they're the gatekeeper to making sure that we're targeting the right schools. I do want to say, from a perspective of working even with private schools, we haven't excluded private schools from our education access scheme. Our job is to create a world where wildlife and support a world where wildlife thrives, and I want all young people to take those values into the world, whatever jobs they end up doing. And for us, it's also really important that we give those teachers, but also those pupils from the different schools, the opportunity to come together because of London Zoo. But yeah, we will target the hardest to reach and those schools that will benefit the most on the advice of the local council and the education authority.
And another question, sir, how do you pick individuals for level 3 engagement, and how long would you typically work with them?
So genuinely, and I've used the expression the preschool to professor, the aim is to really engage with those children, you know, as soon as they start a local school. Hopefully they'll be coming to see us several times throughout the year, and then year on year. So we'll get to know those children from a young age, and therefore how we select that level 3 engagement will really be just through establishing those relationships with those children themselves, but also through working with the schools, working with our partners. In Westminster, there's a initiative called City Lions. So the 2 young people there on the work experience were put forward to us by City Lions, whose job it is to make sure their role is to ensure that young people are gaining these experiences.
And what are some of the underrepresented groups that were identified for the community engagement scheme?
So the key groups were older people who may be isolated, and BAME groups who we're targeting more through just a generic offer, but we aren't represented with Black or ethnic minority groups, or we certainly hadn't been when this research was undertaken 5 years ago. I think that is something that really is improving already now. Low-income families, because of that barrier of cost to the zoo and the perception, and again, people with disabilities and specific disabilities, potentially around physical disabilities, because of the layout and the design and the age of the zoo being so prohibitive. So those were the core areas that we identified through working with partners.
And the final question, in addition to virtual and hosting events, does ZSL ever do on-site workshops with local schools?
So I would say until very recently, 2019, the answer to that would be no. From 2021, it's a big resounding yes. We're going out and working with Camden libraries in the summer, and then from September onwards, anyone who's an Education Access Scheme member, we'll be working with them just as much in their school as we will inviting them into the zoo itself. And again, that's where our scientists, that's where we're looking for you to help, to come in and help go out, to help deliver that outreach as well as the digital sessions. So really our function is the sort of facilitator of matching up those opportunities for those schools.
And that's it for me. Thank you very much, Kerry.
Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Natalie. So we'll move on to our final speaker, who is Dr. Alfredo Carpineti, who is a gay Italian astrophysicist, science journalist, and social activist. He's the chair and founder of Pride in STEM, an award-nominated British charitable trust dedicated to supporting and showcasing LGBT people in science, technology, engineering, and maths. Pride in STEM and other sibling organisations launched and continue to promote LGBT STEM Day, the International Day for LGBTQ+ people in STEM, happening globally on November the 18th. He was recognised as one of the 100 LGBTQ trailblazers by Attitude magazine. So Alfredo, if you're ready to go.
Yes, hello, nice to see you all. Let me share my screen. And should be. Okay, awesome. So hi, I'm Alfredo, and I'm going to be telling you a little bit about what it's like being LGBTQ in STEM, and I'll talk about Pride in STEM and the way we approach, the way we use science communication to highlight the issues and the barriers faced by LGBTQ people in STEM. So, well, let's talk a little bit about identity, and so this is me. My pronouns are here, him, Pride in STEM. and all of that, but the most important thing for the probably next 20 minutes before we get on to what Pride STEM does is that I am a raging homosexual. Why am I raging? This is going to be the first part of our talk. If you aren't raging, you haven't been paying attention to how bad the situation is for LGBTQ people in society worldwide, but also in STEM in particular. So my usual preamble is that whilst science happens in a physical vacuum, after all, I'm a physicist, no science happens in a historical one, and science is and has always been political. This is usually one of the things that we are criticized, insulted, and trolled online, saying that we're bringing politics into science, and the argument is just like that. Science has always been political, it has been shaped by politics, and science has shaped politics. So we cannot keep it away from the rest of society. We cannot pretend or imagine that science is somehow untouched in the world of ideas and pure without what humans do, and what humans do is having biases and making mistakes. So we cannot pretend that science is pure and untouched when it is something that is very human. So why am I raging? Well, there is not much data on what it's like being LGBTQ plus in STEM, but from the data that we have, it shows that things are not good at all. Most people tend to be out to their family or friends compared to their colleagues. This is from Euromatis Journal of Homosexuality from 2013. And it shows quite a dramatic difference between the people that are out to friends and family. And you can see there are people completely in the closet when it comes to university. And this doesn't mean that people should be more proactive in coming out the closets. Anyone can decide how, when, and if they need to be upfront about their sexuality and gender identity. But the fact that there is this distribution hint that a lot of people that are clearly out to friends and family don't feel they can do the same in the workplace, that there's something that they feel put them at risk doing so in the workplace. And we have some data on that from the American Physical Society LGBTQ Climate and Physics report from 2016. We see that the experience of harassment has been through the roof, especially for women and for trans and gender non-conforming people. This is experience of harassment in their department. So we're not talking about general idea. This is what happens in the physics department across the US, and it's terrible. Going into a little bit more details on that, it appears that co-workers don't have the necessary awareness, the necessary education to understand LGBT issues. There is, God, this one is the one that always make me put hands on my face. Employees are expected to not act too gay. So, and 42% reported this is a thing that they've been told or they've felt being in physics department in the US. And as a physicist, I'm just like, if you're saying that there's something that is too gay, in a way you're measuring gayness. So you have a scale of gayness, I don't know, from 0 to Elton John. Where should a good physicist lie? Obviously, it's absurd thing is just a way to justify bigotry in a way that not only others the flamboyant gay, but also separates LGBTQ people in STEM from the rest of the community. So it's doubling the kind of hurt that these people can experience. And 1 in 3 US physicists are being pressured to stay in the closet if they want to succeed in their field. Things are much worse, as I said, for trans and gender conforming people, with some of them not having a bathroom, almost a fifth of them, more than a fifth of them, and not having a bathroom comfortable and safe using. And also co-workers not using the correct pronouns for a large fraction of them. Usually I used to say that this was very much a US problem, the third point, that's not having health benefit covering trans-related needs. But even in the UK, the situation for when it comes to trans health is absolutely abysmal, with one gender clinic now as a waiting list of about 28 years. I said that correctly, years, simply because there is no investment and there is no support. So if we are thinking, okay, maybe this was the current generation, maybe we have higher hopes for the next one, and we see that what is been happening forever is continuing. This is from Use in Science Advances 2018 about retention of sexual minority students, so LGBTQ students in STEM. And despite sexual minority students coming in with more interest in science and doing more undergraduate research, the people that stay in the field is less than heterosexual peers. And mostly they report that they don't see themselves represented in the field, and they don't feel that they belong in the field. Same situation is here in the UK. We find that a good fraction of LGBT plus respondents in this survey from the Royal Society of Chemistry, Institute of Physics, and Royal Astronomical Society say that they're thinking about leaving the workplace, and 20% of trans consider leaving it often. But we also see that this is also quite a large fraction for non-LGBT respondents, and it's hinting at something quite damning about physical sciences in the UK, but I believe that it could probably extend to many other sciences. So here is about a proportion of exclusionary, intimidating, offensive, or harassing behavior in their workplaces. And you can see that although people in the LGBTQ community, and again, we see the non-binary and trans people get the brunt of the harassment, but also that the harassment is across the board, across all sexuality, across all genders, and irrespective of being trans and cis. And we see that this is across everything, even straight people. We can see also here, even straight people report the harassment in a toxic workplace. So while the LGBTQ community is suffering massively, the general approach of harassment that it doesn't taken seriously by HR, that harasser keep getting promoted, and no matter what is being reported take any effect, create an environment in which a huge fraction of people feel uncomfortable being in. Fortunately, everything I mentioned so far doesn't look at things intersectionally, but luckily there's been this new paper that came out in January that has been looking at that, and it's incredibly important. It showed out of 25,000, over 25,000 LGBTQ professionals in STEM in the US, that LGBTQ STEM professionals were more likely to experience career limitation, harassment, professional devaluation, and for trans and non-binary people, even more health difficulties compared to their non-LGBTQ peers. Also, they looked at how women and racial and ethnic minorities were more likely than white and men LGBTQ STEM professional to experience this professional devaluation and harassment at work. So we might hint from some of the statistics that we've seen before with higher numbers for women, for lesbian, that this is also the case here in the UK. But we definitely need more data that looked at all the issue with STEM in an intersectional way to understand what is the priority in taking down which barrier and how can we support everyone to have the career they deserve and to not have to endure harassment in the workplace. And I don't think that is a big ask. This is this is pretty much a summary of what I've just said with all those statistics. So I am somebody that likes to be proactive. So what can we do to change things? So I always call for this inclusive and intersectional revolution. And what do I mean by that? We need to start thinking that we don't just want inclusion. We don't just want people to get in the door. We want them to feel that they belong. They need to know that they can thrive. They need to know that if they have a problem, they can speak out against the problem and it will be taken seriously. To do that, we need to challenge our own biases. We are all biased. There is no one on the planet who is not biased simply because it's how our brain has evolved. And the only thing that can make us good about having biases is remembering that we do have them and we need to challenge ourselves, trying to put ourselves in other people's shoes. And to do that, we need to understand our privileges, understand where we can help, when we can support other people, and when it's time for us not to speak and let someone else talk. And all that, we need to commit to make the world, particularly science, a better place. So before we go on to what Princeton does, here's some few suggestions that come to me, or I usually give to the places where I give talks. The individual level, if you want to support the LGBT community, you can think about having your pronouns in email signature or badges. Try to be an ally proactively. Something that I always repeat is ally is a verb, not a noun. So think of how can you support. If you're senior, share statements of support. It's always nice to hear that people have your back. And participate in mentorship and awareness training, simply because the world is changing constantly and it takes work to understand how to best support everyone. If you have power at an organizational level, maybe think about gender neutral toilets, marking important days, months, having transitioning of work policies, safeguards for your LGBTQ individuals, work with local charities and organizations, but most importantly, consult with the people in the LGBTQ people in your organization and ask how you can best support them. That should always be the first step. Okay, so that is why I'm a raging homosexual and some things you can do. So what do we do with Pride in STEM? So we're a charitable trust. We are in the very long bureaucratic process of applying for charity status, but we started as a charitable trust because we are extremely tiny and also very poor, so we didn't have any legal requirement to do the charity status, but we're doing that simply because I feel that is the next step for us. When we started, we didn't have any ground plan of being an advocacy group or anything that we have become. We simply wanted a tiny group to march in Pride in London. within back in 2016 when we started, you need to every group was pretty much open for people to just join, and for this reason you need to have a website and you need to have an email address where people could contact you. And when we set it up, we had just very simple ethos of being like, we want science and STEM in general to be very supportive of LGBTQ people. We want to be able to be ourselves in our workplace. And almost immediately, we start getting loads of emails from people asking for advice, and stuff like that about being out in the workplace. So we realized pretty quickly that something was needed. We still didn't think that it was going to be us, but we thought that we could put together some resources. We all had some experience in LGBT group and advocacy, so that we could collate resources that could help these people in some way. But that clearly evolved that we could do much more. And one thing that it became quite clear was that we had a lot of skills in communicating science. So we thought, how could we use those kind of skills into delivering some change? And that's how the Outthinkers events came to be. And they are informal science talks by LGBTQ people in STEM. But more on that later. Another thing that it's a huge honor, but also a huge responsibility, is that we have a huge social media presence, especially on Twitter. So we make sure that we pass along the right information and that we can share things that support not just the LGBT community, but any community and any group that is working into improving STEM. And this, as I said, we promote resources. We support a lot of events aim at LGBTQ people in STEM, and we are contributing to actually now several all-party parliamentary groups. And we felt that given what we have seen in the last few years, but especially during the pandemic, it's our responsibility to go and talk about the important issue. And if we don't think sincerely, as I said, we are very small and we hardly have any power to make a big governmental change, but it would be remiss of us not to try to at least argue why there should be change, why there should be more support for all the historically excluded groups in STEM. So, Outthinkers. We had run over 30 events, 30 Outthinkers, mostly across the UK, all over the place, and some abroad. They are informal. I usually describe them as very similar to Pint of Science. We wanted to be for them to be accessible in all the meaning of the words, but very important was that the level was never too high for people to just feel put off by the talks. But we are keen for each speaker to talk about their path and experience. We want them to talk about their identity, and it can be done in very simple terms. So I could just go and say, hi, I'm Alfredo, I'm a gay man, and here is 15 minutes about awesome galaxy collisions. Or we had speakers that sort of had wonderful talks interweaving their journey into understanding their identity with their journey in STEM. We also had people that had it very compartmentalized, that they talk about their identity and then they went into the science. We had one speaker out of the blue that came out on the talk because I had no idea that they weren't out, and they just announced it. So that was, well, very brave. I don't know if I would have done it, but also another way to approach this. We give quite some freedom. The importance for me of this is breaking the barrier. We have heard from our previous speakers how important it is to make science accessible and scientists approachable. And I cannot think of anything more approachable by being on stage and telling something personal about yourself. And I think this should be extended to everyone, and not just say somebody saying, "Oh, I'm a straight man," but talk about your interests, your family, talk about something that you're passionate about beyond your science, and make people realize that you are a person and you are in science or in technology and engineering, maths, because you like the field, because you have some aptitude for it, but not because somehow you have some secret knowledge of some superpower or hyper intelligence that you only can do that. I think it's so important that if we want to change people's attitude on who gets to do science. And our Outthinkers event are diverse, and I use saying by design, because as we heard by Seirian talk, so many men volunteers, and I get so many gay men volunteering. And as a gay man, I think I can say we need to chill a little bit because I think it must be a question of privilege, although clearly gay men don't have the same privilege as straight men. Still have lots of privilege, which means I probably have more free time than many other individuals in the community, probably have higher salary, and that allows me that I can take on more of these science communication events, maybe for free or for a very low fee, and so I volunteer for more stuff, and people hear about me and ask me to speak, and it becomes a vicious circle. So we make sure to, after we ask for volunteers, to go and look for other speakers that might not volunteer if we didn't approach them. And also, although we are tiny and poor, we make sure that we, even a little, for every event, the speakers get a little honorarium to make sure that we can take away a little bit the issue of economic support for them, so they can take the time for preparing their talk, knowing that it's they get something out of it in terms of monetary compensation. Obviously, things have changed over the last year. We had a couple of virtual Outthinkers, but the sort of approach is a little bit different, as you can imagine, with virtual. And so we have also explored the concept of virtual panels. They are being topical, so we picked subjects that were very important and were very in the news across the community. They are community-led, so we had people volunteering or discussing with us how to things to talk about, things that were important, and they are very accessible, so we get them transcribed when they are pre-filmed, professionally transcribed, or they are closed caption when they're not. But we also had sign interpreter during our biggest virtual conference. And we had 7 so far. There's going to be more. I'm very excited. This Friday, we have one about climate change and historically excluded communities, led by 3 fantastic people of color who study climate change and historically excluded communities. So I think it's going to be so important, and it's part of the Edinburgh Science Festival, and it's free. We are not alone in what we do. There are other approaches, like, for example, LGBT STEM and 500 Queer Scientists. Their approach is to create role models by having bios of them online, similar to maybe you heard of 500 women scientists, that it was to get more women to be picked by journalists when asking for expert opinion. But there's also, sorry. There's also group in social media, and there are professional networks that work in different way to promote and to challenge the barriers for the community. And the thing that I am most proud of, the work that we've done in with Pride in STEM, is the creation of LGBTQ STEM Day, which is now celebrated on November 18th. And this was a way to pretty much have everything that we discuss and having the role models and the activism and the discussion on barriers and what we should do next and what you can do to help, etc., on a single day in which we can share a lot of things, in which we can bring people to reflect about what they're doing and how can do better, and but also discussing success stories of we've been doing this in my companies, my university, my department. I think it's very good, and I hope that it could help someone else. So I think this is probably the legacy of Pride in STEM that I'm most proud of. And we are doing it with so many different organizations from across the world. A few more will join us this year, which is very exciting. So we are covered from Australia all the way to the US, and it is fantastic to see so many people just joining together to make something happen. And we have lots of wonderful supporters. If you want to become a supporter, it costs nothing. I like your logo, your tweet on support on the day, and having somebody senior in your organization to send a statement of support in internal, just to say, look, this is what this is the kind of protection we have in our organization. You matter, we care about you, and we have your back. And with that, thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Alfredo. So I'm going to hand over to Natalie for the questions.
Hi, Alfredo. So there's quite some questions for you. So the first one is, why do you think the harassment is worse for women, gender non-conforming and trans people than for gay men?
I think that there is certainly a level of privilege when it comes to being a cis gay man. I think when it comes to, so the data on the APS was collected during the primary, the 2015 primary. So one of the Republican platform discussion was the trans, the bathroom bills and trans panic bills, and I think that was something that it was very much happening in the mainstream, with people not realizing that, I don't know, for example, everyone home has gender-neutral bathrooms, because you don't gender your toilets in your home. And so I think with respect to trans and gender non-conforming people, there is a lot of ignorance of not knowing enough, and media discussing it in sound bites. When it comes to women, I think there is just, well, the patriarchy and misogyny that we've been carrying forever, that is just being perpetrated and continued in physics department. But I'm sure that unfortunately it can extend far beyond that. So I think that is the major difference, is not that somehow gay men are not discriminated against, is simply that by the fact that they're men, they probably receive less.
And a few of the study that you mentioned on LGBTQ plus in STEM focused on the US. Do you think there is a lack of engagement in the UK to conduct similar studies?
Yes and no. I think that, for example, the one from the Royal Society of Chemistry and the Institute of Physics and Royal Astronomical Society was just from 2 years ago, and there was quite a bit of engagement. The Royal Society had one in 2014 that looked at diversity across the science workforce. But for example, didn't even did very well in breaking all the other categories: women, gender stuff, ethnic stuff, disability stuff, but didn't even ask about being LGBTQ. And there, and you think, okay, maybe it was not discussed. The year later, the Institute of Physics did a more in-depth study just specific on physicists. We're asking the LGBTQ question, but there is, although they discuss things as LGBT plus people, no mention of trans people throughout the report. And so there is this, I think people, I think the conversation wasn't at the level that there was enough awareness. We certainly, now that the UK is out of the EU, in our one of the evidence submission that we did for the all-party parliamentary groups that I mentioned, we have asked for more data taken at a higher level, and I hope that we see that. But what I really hope as well is seeing some qualitative data and seeing more details, and definitely we need intersectional data, because we need to understand where the barriers are. Where is the struggle? Who is struggling especially? And I feel that until we have that qualitative data where we really understand, we can only have a vague approach. So we can call for transparent and like serious dealing of harassment, and that should be a major priority. But what else are we missing? We had in previous talk discussion of the leaky pipeline. How else are we missing? What are we missing that could support more people across all the aspects of diversities?
It's actually a question that we had quite some question around intersectionality. So people have been asking us to whether there's actually any data on LGBTQ plus and other dimension of diversity, such as disabled or being part of an ethnic minority, etc. So do we know anything at all? Is there literally no data?
The best paper is the one from Science Advances from 2019. Is the only one that look at the question truly intersectionally, and it is in a way for me upsetting how, because even in the clearly the 2014 Royal Society one, although apart, if we want to ignore the LGBT question for a second, they clearly have enough data to work out the intersection about gender, socioeconomic status, ethnic background, and disability status. But there's no discussion there. But they have the data. The data is there. It could understand if who is suffering more in the intersection, what kind of barriers you are missing because you're focusing on things like their separate boxes. So yeah, it's important. I think it's important that whenever new studies, and there will be new studies, I want to be optimistic, they look at things intersectionally, because that's where we can see how to craft the best intervention, how to properly knock down barriers, because we might miss them.
And a bit related to this to some extent is that I know you said that there's a lot of gay men volunteering. Mm-hmm. Does this include actually gay men of color or from?
Yes, they are within the volunteers. They tend to be like white cis gay men like we. We are way the majority, and it's fine. I always tell them I'm going to put them on little spreadsheets that I keep only for 12 months for GDPR rules, and they will be called at some point. But yeah, gay men, gay cis men of color tend to be our second more popular. Now, some LGBT sexual minority women, so LG and B, tend to be volunteering a little bit more, which is good. But yeah, it's something that we are still struggling, is to have volunteers that are women of colors in particular, and so we are trying to be a lot more proactive when we plan our events on having. We're going to have some volunteers and we're going to have some invited speakers.
And then I think that the study you mentioned about people being advised to not act too gay resonated with a lot of people.
Yeah, it was from senior staff.
It was from senior staff.
Yeah, if you go through the little histograms that I shared are from the. They have a sort of nice slide report, but then there is also a more detailed report. But again, this is data in the US from 6 years ago. So I always say things are changing, not everything for the better, but I think people are becoming a lot more aware of the issues. So while I think that until there are dramatic changes, harassment was not going to stop. I think understanding of the issues is changing, and I cannot believe that people are just so completely unaware of LGBT issues when so many, for example, big laboratories or universities are running Pride months and flying the rainbow flags, etc. They might not have the sort of correct know-how, but they cannot be unaware that this is a thing that is happening, that it is a discussion happening in STEM. So I think that that has certainly changed, and I like to hope for the better because I'm an optimist. But when we have more data, we can probably make an assessment.
And then I may have a question about, or at least picking your brain on something. So I work in conservation, where a lot of our scientists also go in other countries to work with communities. And as you know, the anti-LGBTQ plus sentiment, feeling, and sometimes laws have increased in a lot of countries.
Yeah.
And we see colleagues battling between being a role model for UK students and then not jeopardizing their ability to work in those countries or putting their safety as risk. Yeah. Is that something that Pride in STEM is looking at?
Yes, we collaborated with a group to run a pilot project, but unfortunately did not. Nobody wanted to fund us, so we couldn't find a way to best support to have a. What we were looking at was not exactly a legal framework, but a structured way for organization to approach this question. What we actually, and it's something that we submitted in our all-party parliamentary group evidence, is the fact that we think the choices are about the individual. So each individual needs to decide if they feel going into countries in which they are at risk. And it's, we like to think that this could just be reduced to countries that are not the West, but just have a look at the media, and the situation for trans people here is terrible. And in Spain last weekend, a 24-year-old gay man was beaten to death for being gay. So it's we might think that places where there are laws we will be safe, but this is not the case. So what we are asking organizations to consider is having something ready, being aware of where you're sending your employees, whether for conferences, whether for workplace and conservation for studies, etc., and making sure that you have something already written, a plan, if something bad happens. Whether it be legal, whether it be having contact with the Foreign Office, whether it be support links, anything that could help, and share it with your employees. I think it's very important. I don't want anyone should feel, and as I said, nobody should be putting themselves at risk, trying to be a role model, and here and try and risk their safety where they work or where they study, etc. So it boils down to the single person responsibility and choice, but also they need to know that the organization have their back. And I think that is so important. And then they can make the choice if they want to go or not. I think that is the best can answer this.
Thank you very much, Alfredo. That's it for me, Ida.
Great, thank you. So thank you everyone for joining us. We'll end the session there. So a big thank you to all of our speakers and everyone who joined us and asked questions. This session is going to be on YouTube, probably later tonight or tomorrow if anyone's missed it or wants to share it. So please join us tomorrow where we've got session 3, Opening Up Sciences to New Audiences with Dr. Praveen Paul, Dr. Nicholas Bond and Dr. Daniela Rabaiotti. So thanks very much. Bye.